one of the issues that you have advocated and which is debated that previous administration looked at it in the framework, but now we've seen the implementation process in this government is the Treasury Single Account for all ministries and departmental agencies. So far, what was your view about the process of implementing that framework?
Right. The Treasury Single Account is a very, very practical need for the Nigerian government. A situation in which the government is unable to fund 1 year's budget. 2015 budget, we are told deficit figures in the federal account alone close to 2 trillion naira. That's staggering. Now, if you have such revenue inadequacy, a situation where you now grant autonomy to revenue collecting agencies to first spend the money they collect and then remit a fraction of the surplus they declare is surprising. It's surprising that that kind of situation could ever have been allowed, and it's surprising that it had continued for so long. Where government has no money to spend on capital items, all the revenue goes on recurrent. You have to borrow to fund capital budgets. Yet, you have revenue collecting agencies that play heavily in the property market. They spend heavily on capital headings, building new head offices, zonal offices. We're talking 20-story building of offices that are largely unoccupied, equipped, with all the modern gadgets, but not unoccupied. They are unnecessary capital spending. I mean, you have revenue collecting agencies building international conference centers. You need to end that. Let government revenue come into government coffers.
So you talk about blocking the leakages.
Yeah, let all government revenue, a situation where Nigeria does not know how much is collected on their behalf, because you want to get 80% of surplus declared by revenue agencies, not the gross, receipts by revenue collecting agencies. So I do hope that we can transit to a situation where no government revenue is outside of the consolidated purse, that we could see how much has been collected on behalf of government on a daily basis, on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis, and that nobody can spend a penny out of the money except through appropriation. A situation where a 12-member board of a government agency claim independence from government, and they decide, on how to spend Nigeria's money, should end. No such powers should be given to boards. Boards' powers should be limited to drawing up their budgetary requirements and submitting same to the National Assembly for appropriation. Not that boards will be so powerful as to drop their spending requirements without reference to anybody. They are unelected.
Yes.
Without reference to elected chambers, could authorize, billions, if it all sums up to trillions of naira. It's a lack of accountability, it's a lack of transparency, and it should stop.
Okay. Now you said the issue of the lack of accountability, lack of transparency, and this TSA should be, you also said something that is really interesting, and Nigeria is the largest economy in terms of GDP in Africa, but we're not the biggest government revenue.
We're actually one of the smallest government revenue as a fraction of GDP.
Now you said that in 2009, let's say we had a quarter in terms of revenue, and now it's 12%.
That's right.
Do you see this government reinventing the capacity for Nigeria to build its government revenue base even over quarter in the next 2-3 years?
Nigeria already has the capacity. But what we know is true of the government, the last regime, was that the money was collected, but about half of what was collected leaked. So we can get back to quarter of a GDP in shortest possible time. It's a question of how long does it take you to block the leakages. It's as simple as that. I mean, one leakage, crude oil theft, has that now stopped, and what impact is that having on our revenue? The other leakage, spurious payments of fuel subsidy, has it stopped? And so if it stopped, what impact is it having, on the revenue? And then the abuses to duty waivers. It's now an issue of how soon the new government can demonstrate to us the impact of these measures on the revenue situation.
Probably one of the issues we may expect changing, because we hear diversifying the economy, but at least the rebasing showed that our economy is significantly diversified to an extent. If you, as an economist, you can elaborate further on that. But we're looking at diversifying the revenue base, and interestingly, one of the ministerial nominees who would likely to serve in the economic management team talked about that. How would you advise this government, considering the fact that this is a serious challenge in funding, financing? How would you look at diversifying the revenue base? What should be the approach in that regard?
Well, in the short term, I would limit the requirements to the ones that we have identified. Okay. If we have achieved 40% of GDP in revenues before, and now we can't do 13% of GDP, you don't even need the South African example. They do like 25% of GDP. You don't need the example. You used to do 40% of GDP. Within the last 1 decade, you were doing a quarter. You were comfortably doing a quarter of GDP. So you've done it before. Go and trace the leakage. It's as simple as that. Do that, and diversification is about the Nigerian economy today. It will be like 95 trillion naira.
By estimate?
Well, it was 89 trillion at the end of 2014. This is already October.
Least,
yeah, so it will be closer, to 100 trillion. Only 12 billion of that is oil. So you are dealing with a non-oil economy of about 80 trillion naira. That doesn't give you 3 trillion in revenue. It doesn't give you 4% in tax revenue. So what are we saying about diversification? And the point is that the non-oil revenue gets collected. It leaks. DT waivers, tax waivers, and non-oil revenue. They don't even hit the books. Somebody signs them off, and you claim that, then the TSA is essentially non-oil revenue. I mean, this leakage is through revenue autonomy. Nigerian Ports Authority, can decide to build a ship house. You wonder whether that's what you want your agencies to do, build buildings that looks like the sector they are meant to be regulating, or actually strengthening those sectors. And Central Bank has built 2 head offices in the last 1 decade, and I understand they are also building zonal offices, that. So you get it, those spending don't show up in revenue because they will have spent. It's only what they declare as surplus and remit that shows up in revenue. Is wrong. So if they are collecting so much money on behalf of the Nigerian government, let it show up in revenue, and then through expenditure appropriate them. So if those could show up, then we can get back to quarter of a GDP soon, and therefore the diversification will occur just by blocking leakages. So I'm not looking for new sources, of revenue. I'm more for the ones that are already being collected, reflecting in government books.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ayo Teriba. I believe that this was a very interesting discussion, and it's possible that we can get back to over 40% even in the last decade.
I don't know about 40% yet, but we can get cut out with GDP.